And welcome to this week's Wednesday webinar. I'm Shannon Dill. I'm with University of Maryland Extension and happy to have everyone here today to hear about who's going to take over the farm, a very important question that farm and farm families need to address. So with us today is Maria and Jesse, and I'll let them introduce themselves, but they're a great team. They've presented a number of times with our programs and happy to have them here today. We will be sending a slide set afterwards, and just a real quick thank you and shout out. We have a number of sponsors of the Women in Ag program, as well as collaborators, with University of Delaware being one of our team members. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Maria and Jesse.
So welcome and thanks for joining us today. As Shannon said, I'm Maria Pepitas. I work with the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension. I'm a family and consumer science educator. I work a lot in the areas of personal finance, health insurance, farm succession planning, and more recently, farm resilience. And so I'll turn it over to Jesse. He can introduce himself and then we'll get going.
Thank you, Maria. My name is Jesse Ketterman. I am a family and consumer sciences educator in the Western Cluster of Maryland, with a focus on financial and health insurance literacy. And like Maria, I have been involved in a couple different varieties of farm stress management and resilience. And I'm also an accredited financial counselor.
Cool. So we're taking a little bit of a different tack today in terms of the content. Because, we often, and there are many folks who are doing kind of farm succession planning type of work. And what we thought we'd do is just take a little bit more, a kind of a finer look at who's going to take over the farm operations and kind of focus more on the notion of training and personnel development. And so I am going to ask you all, what are some of the skills that are necessary for farming? What are some of those things, those tasks, those, the kind of the educational training, those kinds of things that are really important for making your farm successful? And if you wouldn't mind, just type in those in the chat, and then maybe Jesse could kind of shout them out to us as they come in.
I can do that. And Maria, just so you're aware, you're in the presentation view on the screen. So versus you have the notes or the slides on the right-hand side there. There you go. You're good.
Right. Thank you.
And so our the first response is early hour awakening. So getting up early.
Getting up early, that is true. I have a couple of my nieces and nephews who are teenagers. They could never work on the farm, that is for sure, because they are not up until at least 11. Those lazy bums. What else? Think about your, what do you grow? Are there things around the types of foods that you're growing or products that you're growing? Yeah, don't be afraid of the weather or bugs. Yeah, that's great. So some of the things that I think the USDA recognizes is this idea that farmers really require ongoing education to stay aware of kind of those fast-moving technologies or developments in technologies, in the science around whatever it is that you're growing, kind of business management and all sorts of skills. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those as we go along in our presentation today. But in order for agricultural operations to be successful, there's a lot that people need to know. And oftentimes it's hard to know everything really well. So things like organizational skills, right? Keeping track of the paperwork, from the income and expenses to the inputs and outputs, and sort of the decisions that need to be made around all of those things. Another important skill is just managing, right? Managing oneself, the employees, kind of balancing work and family, kind of business savvy and creating and adapting your business plans, analyzing that financial information, creating markets, sustaining markets, interacting with financial advisors. All of those are really key. And so then it's not only about those things, right? The business plan or the finances, but also about how do you interact and ask questions and maintain relationships with those people who help you do those things, right? Training and education is really important, both for yourself and then the people who may be working on the farm with you, whether that's family members or farm workers. And, as time progresses, right, over your lifetime, and you're hoping to maybe pass the farm on to family members or farm workers, sort of how do you train them? How do you engage them in learning about the farm over time? Other kinds of things that you need skills in are those people skills, right? Being able to communicate, being interpersonal, especially as we're talking about building those relationships, building a customer base, those sorts of things. Lifelong learning is really important because, as I mentioned before, the technology, the science, and change, and we need to be willing to continue to work and learn. Being analytical and critical, and thinking and problem solving in an ever-changing world is so important to help you stay on top of and move your business forward. And then there's the kind of the mechanical side, right? Or the technical side, do you have the skills to maintain equipment or fix equipment? Or if not, then at least know enough so you're not taken advantage of by those folks that you might hire to help repair or maintain equipment. So those are key skills. And like I said before, that is a lot. So, oftentimes some of those skills are shared across personnel or between spouses, for example, who might be running a farm, or between, an elder farmer and their son or daughter who might be taking over the farm eventually, or maybe even some other farm workers, and then kind of delegating out who's in charge of what. All of that is really important to kind of build your team, so to speak, so that your farm can be successful. So in the risk management world, we talk about human capital, right? It's those resources, those skills, that knowledge that we humans and those of us who are working on the farm need to develop and need to share to keep the farm afloat. And so human capital planning is important, right? Being able to think about what does the future hold? What happens if something happens to me? Who will take over the farm? Do they know enough to be able to do that? And so things like, if something unexpected happens to you, maybe it's an illness, or, you break a bone or something, that, kind of having someone who knows enough to keep the operation going is really important. Training your family members or team members to improve their skills. It can also help create motivation, right? Creating the time and space for learning to happen. And oftentimes farms can be very busy places. And so, consciously creating the time so that you can be training people as you go along. Human capital planning is also important for, creating that vision of the farm to happen. So what is your vision for the future for the farm? And how do those people who are on the farm help make that vision happen. And then certainly you know, those people that you're cultivating and training and supporting in taking over the farm is going to, you know, kind of be collective, right? And so they may have ideas. And so how does that change your business plan, right? How does that guide the development of your business plan going forward? And I should probably also add estate plan, right? And so how do those plans change over time, given the human capital that you are cultivating on your farm? So one of the things that I've come across as I've done programming with farmers is kind of recognizing that people have different learning preferences. And so your way of learning new information, you know, you're going to seek out those opportunities that are comfortable for you. Do you like to read? Do you like to listen? Do you like to just jump in and do? And so all of us have different preferences in terms of how we learn. And so understanding your own learning preference is really kind of important for your own self, right? But also how you interact with other folks. And so I thought we would just do a very quick kind of learning preference survey so that you all can kind of get a sense of what your learning preference style is. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of do this little quiz, this little, a little quiz. And what you're going to do is read the question and then the statements that are within the boxes. And what I'd like you to do is just write down the color of the box that best describes your learning preference. So, for example,
And Maria, can I just add real quickly?
Yes.
That there is not one right or wrong learning style, right?
Right.
That it's just that everybody has different learning styles and everybody brings different strengths to the table. So keep in mind that as we're doing this, it's not that we're trying to say this is the right learning style for the person to take over your farm operation, right? It's just getting a better sense of who that other individual is so that you can learn to work better with that individual.
Thank you. That helps clarify. So our first question is, as a learner, I prefer to, and so now you're going to read the 4 items in each of the boxes, right? I prefer to listen to a lecture, work in a small group, read articles and case studies, or participate in role plays. And so what I want you to do is, you know, think about each of those 4 things, 4 statements, and write down the color of the box that is most like you. And you might have a couple ties, that's all right. You know, write down both colors. I'll give you a moment to kind of do that for yourself. All right, that's great. So let's go on to the second question. So I learn best when I, and then here we have our statements, see relationships between ideas or the events and the situations, or interact with others, or receive practical tips, or observe a demonstration or a video. So again, write down the color. If you want to put them in the chat, that's great. If not, just keep it to yourself. All right, everybody done? Okay, we're going to do the last question. After attending a training session, I tend to think about what I learned. I'm anxious to put my learning into action. Reflect on the experience as a whole, or tell others about my experience. So again, pick the colors that best describe you. All right, everybody done? So, so look at the kind of the tally, right? Did you have more reds or blues or yellows or purples? Give me 1 second here. So, each of these learning styles, as Jesse said before, are absolutely okay. And we are all different and we all learn in different ways. And so none of these are better than the other. It's just that this is the way we learn. And so for each of these, then there tends to be some general approaches that each of us take because of that learning preference or that learning style. And so then that kind of means that we like to receive information in certain ways. And this is important because, and I have found this in my own family, right? I tend to be a thinker and a doer, right? I tend to think about things and then I try it out. Whereas other people in my family, they kind of sit back, they watch, they observe. Maybe they'll try it out, but it's not until they're confident that they'll actually try it out, where they might ask a ton of questions before they try it out. And so what I have found is in my family, I tend to have to, show people how to do things. This one person I'm thinking of in particular, show them how to do things, let them watch, let them ask questions, and then, okay, we'll do it again together, right? And that's the way she likes to learn. So that's very different than someone who may be a thinker and has to kind of read things and think about them and kind of get themselves settled and feeling confident that they know everything before they take steps going forward. And that doer tends to be the person that just jumps right in. Oh, you want me to do that? I'm going to go do it. And they don't ask a lot of questions. And then you might have to come back around and go, oh, that's great, but you didn't quite do it right? Because they just jumped in and did it. And a feeler tends to be someone who's kind of very interested in how do things affect me? How do things affect other people? How do things affect maybe the animals that I'm caretaking? And is going to take that into account as they take on new tasks and learn things. Their motivation, right, might be based on how that task makes themselves feel or someone else feels, right? So as I said, then there's kind of different techniques, I'll just say, for these different learning preferences, learning styles. So a doer, as I said, really likes to practice, likes to apply concepts, loves kind of simulations. They want to try it out and see how it's going to work. A feeler is really into what are those personal experiences or maybe those personal relationships, may be willing to kind of work in groups and learn together because they like being around people and they like those kinds of situations where there's interaction. An observer is someone who might like lectures or discussion, kind of focused problem solving. And a thinker likes to read, asks questions, kind of likes those independent activities, right? I'm gonna, like, once I learn it all, I'm gonna go do it. So this is kind of important, right? As I said before, because if you have one tendency, right, how we tend to teach is based on the way, our preference, right? So if I'm a doer, I'm just gonna, like, all right, just go out there and do it. I'll let you know what you did right and what you did wrong. As opposed to someone, but you might be talking to someone who's a thinker, and they're like, no, I can't do that until I need to read about it. I need to understand it. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm not going to just go out and do it. I need to understand it more. So then, of course, then there could be a clash, right? Because you're just saying, nah, just go do it. And they're saying, no, I need to learn more before I do anything. So partly that's important, because if there's that tension, then, if I'm the doer and I'm interacting with a thinker and they're not doing what I'm asking them to do, then I'm going to be like, ugh, what a pain. I'm not going to work with that person. That's not an appropriate way to work on the farm, whatever it is they're thinking, right? Like, oh, that person doesn't really care. That person doesn't really want to help. Well, no, that may not be it at all. They just need a different way of learning what you're trying to teach them. So it's important to understand this, whether we're talking about farming or any other part of our lives, right? Because that disconnect or any conflict may kind of bubble up into something even bigger than it should be, when it really comes down to those preferences and how people want to learn. So, any questions about this at this point? So someone asked, can there be a mixture of observer and feeler? And the answer is yes. You're not just one. You can be kind of a mixture of different ways of learning. And sometimes it's context, right? Sometimes it's what am I learning about? And so that's appropriate too. Something that, isn't really high risk, I might just go and do it, right? But for things that I'm worried about or want to make sure I do it the right way, right? I'm kind of a thinker. So absolutely, there can be a mixture.
I would say think of it as you're like a dot in that circle, and that you could fall anywhere in that circle. You may fall strongly over to that doer side and be on the outer edge, or you may be closer to the middle point with some skills, with each of those areas. It really varies, and that's one of the interesting pieces about when you do these types of activities is you don't fall into one bubble, and everybody in that bubble is the same. Everybody within that group can be different.
Thank you. That's a great point. So I'm curious, what did you all turn out to be? If you feel like sharing, just type it in the chat. Are you a doer, a thinker, a feeler, observer? Jesse is definitely a doer. I tend to be a thinker, but sometimes also a feeler, depending on what I'm doing.
I'm trying to think where some of my colleagues would fall on your scale.
I have some that are just plain lazy. I don't know where it falls on this scale, but so thanks. Francis is a thinker, and Hoalo, is that how you say that? is a doer and thinker. I'm sorry if I messed up your name. I apologize. All right. So let's move on then. Thanks for sharing. And so I think you can see where this is going, right? Where we are thinking about, those skills that are really important to know for the farm, and then thinking about, and so how do you train your personnel? And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Jesse. He's going to talk a little bit more about how we can do that.
I guess that turns it over to me then, doesn't it? I'm getting ready to post. I know Shannon shared this. I'm also going to post it into the chat box here, but it's a tool that we're going to be talking about here in a minute. But, so now we're going to transition from, what your kind of personality type is to some of the skills that you're going to need. And so go ahead and move us over to the next slide there, Maria. And so what I posted in the chat box, which Shannon has sent out, is something that Maria created, and we're just calling it a tool to assess and develop skills. And I want you to think of this in a couple different ways. One, I want you to think of it as a way to assess yourself, a way to assess others that you may be thinking of as successors to the farm. So it may be one successor or maybe multiple successors. And even within this scale, you might even look at that column of items 1 through 18 and say, you know what, these are definites. These are definite skills that you need to have for this particular farm operations. And so you may, put a 1, a 2, or a 3 beside them just to say, this is most important, this is least important in terms of the skills that go along with your farm. And I want you to keep in mind, this isn't an absolute, right? People are going to fall at different places on the scale. And just because someone doesn't rate highly on the scale in one column doesn't mean they're not in a position to be a successor of your farm operation. And so with that in mind, you think about these and say, are these skills, when you rate yourself or rate someone else, and this probably applies more to when you rate someone else, is this person low on the score because they haven't been given the opportunity to use that skill yet, right? Sometimes when we are the one that's running the farm operations, we like to manage all these aspects, and so we haven't necessarily given an opportunity for other people to grow and develop some of those areas. So keep in mind that this assessment can also be used as a tool to grow those people that may be taking over your farm operation. So looking at those items, again, we're not gonna, if you can print this out and kind of reflect on it more, but I'm gonna run down through these skills. What I want you to think of right now, without using the scale 1 to 10, is where do you think you would fall? Where do you think the individual or individuals that would be a successor to your farm fall? So when you think about crop management, does that apply to your particular operation? And where do you fall on that scale? And then where does the successor fall on that scale? In some cases, they may have a strength that's higher, or a score that's higher than your particular score, and that's fine as well. Livestock management, marketing, and again, marketing depends upon how you move your product, right? So there's different types of marketing skills needed for different types of operations on the farm. Purchasing, purchasing's a great one to kind of evaluate. I know that when my wife and I travel and we're going to stay overnight in a hotel, she always lets me go in first because she knows I'm going to try to negotiate a better rate, right? Where if I had let her walk in, she won't even ask the question, right? So purchasing can be an important thing to consider when you're buying things as well, and how much you're paying for goods. Your mechanical ability and your construction skills, managing people, right? There are people that have strengths in managing people and others that have a weakness in that. The same with financial management. And then identifying and securing resources, endurance. And so we all have different abilities when it comes to endure. Usually, being task oriented the way I am, once I kind of get something on my mind, I got to kind of follow it through and make sure that it gets done. But there's other people that kind of are able to check out and move on to the next task easily. Emotional endurance. And again, we all know that farming can be stressful. So there's an emotional component that goes along with that. Analytical ability, decision-making, the ability to take risk, communication skills and negotiation skills, leadership skills and technology skills. So those are all areas that, again, you can use to do kind of a self-assessment for where you fall in those areas in terms of your management skills, and then a potential successor. And then you can use this as a discussion point between the two of you, or you can use it as how do I develop the successor in these areas where I have a greater strength than they do. So lots of different ways that you can use this. It's a great tool. I'm glad that Maria put it together and that it's something you can use in your farm operation. So there are some keys to creating a good learning environment. So, how do you bring people up, right? That's what we're trying to do when we talk about succession planning. How do we prepare someone for the next stage? And so we came up with this list of items that that help create that environment where someone is willing and ready to learn. So start from where the learner is. Don't assume that they know. So think about, you're where you're at because you've done this for years, but that doesn't mean that's where the other person is at this point. So keep that in mind. Always explain why or provide context. So helping them understand, just don't do and without some type of an explanation, and help them understand what's going on. And I can relate this. I was working with a friend of mine that's an electrician, and he sat down. It was a great learning opportunity for my son, because when he was kind of showing, he was going to hook up a light switch, a three-way light switch in the house. And he explained to my son how a three-way light switch works. He just didn't hook up wires and say, hey, the red wire goes here, the black wire goes here, and the white wire goes here. He explained how the power runs through that. So providing context is important. Be open to innovation and differences in how the learner implements the knowledge, skills, and information. I guess that's another element where, someone that is coming in has a different set of backgrounds, values, experiences, and all those things may lead to new ideas to try out. And so you want to be open, you want to listen to them. And in many situations, you can share your experience and expertise. They might want to try something that you already have, or they may try something and you can give them some insight as to what may have worked or didn't work in your situation. Try to make things, break them down into learnable chunks. So you don't want to overwhelm someone with too much information and kind of scare them away, essentially. So make sure that you're giving them pieces of information to move forward from. Again, you do want to make it easy to start practicing the skill. You do want to limit distractions, and even in your teaching, limit those distractions, right? If there's a lot going on, maybe you need to say, okay, we're going to talk about this another time, or there's, there's a time and place for everything, I guess, is the quote that kind of goes along with that. Make sure that you're in a situation where they are giving you their undivided attention. And that kind of ties into the next one, optimal time of day and to discuss. And again, you want to make this an enjoyable process as you move forward. And so there are some things to think about in terms of best practices for passing along knowledge and building capacity. One is to develop a business plan and to have a business plan. And in some cases, you may not have worked on your business plan for years because you know what your plan is. But to be able to communicate it with something else is a different skill set. And so if you can put something in writing that shows what your business plan is, that also helps them and to understand, why the farm operates the way in which it does. So developing a business plan is important. And again, when you talk about succession planning, there might be a need to acquire additional finances, and the business plan is an important part of being able to acquire those finances. You do want to be a good mentor and make sure that the person that is taking over the operations can do so in a successful way. So make sure that you view yourself as a mentor. Introduction to one-on-one services. So over time, you have developed a lot of skills and a lot of people and a lot of connections. And so how do you, and this ties into the networking, which is the next one, how do you introduce your successor to all the contacts that you've made over the years? Again, you don't want to leave them not knowing who to contact when there's a problem. And then, we try to do this with storytelling is telling things as stories so that people can relate to them. It's a good way to get others to relate if you can tell them a story and keep them interested through doing it as such. And so what are the next steps? What are the things that you need to do next? We have a couple points or suggestions for you. One is have a discussion about who wants to take over the farm business in the future. And that question is, in some cases, you might have multiple people interested. So how do you make that decision? What type of farm business may allow for multiple people? What direction do you want to take it in? Do you want to move it over into one individual and the others support that individual? So, it's about having discussions and communicating with all those parties involved. You want to assess the compatibility of each individual's personal, family, and business objectives. And so your ideas of someone taking over the farm may not be their interest, right? So again, having those conversations, seeing what their skill set is, what they can bring to the table are also important next steps. And then we talked about, we gave you the examples today, develop a strategy to assess skills and to address discrepancies. Again, that was the purpose of the two exercises that we did today. You do want to create learning opportunities, be clear about roles and progression of transfer. And progression of transfer is another topic, right? You may be thinking you want to transition immediately, where the other individual may want a longer period of time, or you may say, I'm not ready to give this up completely. I still want to be involved. And so making sure that you communicate that is important. And to reinforce that is, again, write out a plan with task and timeline so that both you and the other parties involved have something that you can fall back to and say, okay, this was our plan. This is how we're coming along. It doesn't mean that you don't revise that plan at times, but having it laid out clearly communicates to everybody involved. And then there's going to be times where you need to involve outside experts. And so recognizing what your limitations are and then where you need to bring in someone else is important. And so final thoughts here, a couple other points that when Marie and I were planning this, human capital is one part of the succession plan. So there are other components to this you need to think about. What happens with the property, what happens with the equipment, what happens with the animals, what happens with, other aspects of it. But it's not just about human capital. So you got to think through all those pieces. You do need to be strategic, so consider how to navigate your discussions. And training mentors for each person will have different feelings and ideas about taking over the farm. And so you do want to be thoughtful of others' situations and feelings and emotions and values and beliefs and all those other things. So you do need to be considerate of how you plan that. We talked about the business plan already. Again, a business plan may change as you work together to develop the future of the farm operations, but having the plan is definitely an important part in your planning. And estate planning is a part of this as well. And so don't forget to think about what is your next step and how are you planning out your next step and how does that fall into the succession planning as well. You know, do you plan to live on the farm or not live on the farm? Is it, you know, where you want to live? And so there's a lot of little components that go along with succession planning. And I know there's a lot of workshops that go along with succession planning. So we're just introducing you to some of those things that you want to think about, some tools that you can use to assess your skills and the skills of those involved. But it is a much larger process, and there's a lot of resources out there to help you through that.
Thanks, Jesse.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, you know, now that you've kind of heard this, do you have any thoughts or insights or stories that you might tell that kind of shows maybe of how another farm did this or how your farm is doing this? We have a quiet bunch today. So I can tell a success story. So there is a farm close to where I work located in Maryland, though, and so it's been in the family a long time. And at some point, the I'll just call it the elder generation, they had 5 children. And the farm was in a place where they really had to make some decisions about how they wanted to move forward because it's very close to a suburban setting. And so the family was getting offers to sell the property. And so they had a big family discussion, and there were some of the children who weren't so interested in farming, but wanted to support the farm in some way. So all of the kids have the opportunity to go to school to get a college degree. That was part of the agreement within the family. But, you know, one of them was really into business management, and another one was into kind of software and IT, and another one was into kind of creating markets. And so, you know, they talked as a family. And so the farm kind of grew, actually. You know, they were committed to keeping the farm, and the farm grew. And so there was another one who kind of went through for training around fruit and vegetable production. And so all of a sudden the farm decided to expand, and they had a UPIC, right, operation. And then one of the kids came back and took over the financial aspects of the farm, and someone else kind of was in charge of the marketing, and they eventually built a market. And so one of the grandchildren was really into baking, and so now all of a sudden there's a farmer's market on the farm. And so that was a way that they could kind of cultivate the skills of family members who wanted to be involved with maintaining the farm, but they really had to be open to evolving the farm from the way it used to be, which was basically an apple orchard. And so they've, you know, expanded, and now it's all sorts of UPIC berries and apples and peaches and plums and, all sorts of fruit trees and all sorts of kind of berry picking. And then, as I said, the market and the bakery, and they make apple cider donuts and have other, canned product and fresh produce there. And then there's actually one of them who lives in Florida and that's the son. They live in Florida, but he's in charge of all the marketing. So he's actually not on the farm, but is helping to do the marketing and whatnot. So there are, success stories in that way where kind of strategic thinking and strategic planning helped the farm stay a farm, the land stay in production, and that different family members could kind of do what they were most passionate about in order to help the farm stay a farm. So I just offer that as a kind of a success story that, here the senior generation was very open and willing to support the education and training of the children and the grandchildren, and rethinking their business model and rethinking, kind of what's important, right? And I guess they decided family was important and the farm was important. So how are we going to make it all work, right? So I just share that. And, if you have a story similar, I'd love to hear it. And if not, I think, we've come kind of to the last of our slides. And we thank you for attending today. If you got any questions, now's the time.